Appreciate all of you coming, and we'll look forward to your participation as we move forward through the panel. My name is Jeff Goldhagen. I'm here because Hancock's asked me to come. Feel like a duck out of water a bit. I'm a pediatrician and chief of community societal pediatrics at the University of Florida in Jacksonville, but I've spent a lot of time working in the arena of juvenile justice from our perspective. The issues impacting children in particular in the juvenile justice system are of critical importance to children's health and well-being. So it's an exciting opportunity for me to be here. This is essentially becomes my presence here, then makes this convening interdisciplinary, so I'm the interdisciplinary person. I can tell you these meetings are a bit different from our pediatrics meetings. We don't have armed security people at pediatrics meetings. We've got breastfeeding corners and other things, and lots of child care centers, but no police presence. But I recognize the reason for that. I left this morning or last night. When I left, I asked my wife, should I bring a tie? She said, absolutely, you should bring a tie. And so I have a tie here. Just want to make sure. I never asked her if I had to wear it or not. It was a difficult decision walking in and seeing a sea of ties, but I get credit for bringing the tie. All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started? We have a wonderful panel. And obviously the focus today or this morning is going to be on issues related to mental health, and we have a broad array of people with varying expertise. So the framework is we're going to give each of our participants 7 to 10 minutes to talk. We'd like to open this up for dialogue and discussion, and at the end, hopefully be able to bring this back around and not talk just about what the problems are and what the issues are, but hopefully bring it back around to come up with some solutions. In order to have some efficiency to the panel, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce the panelists quickly to start with and go from there. So the person that's going to talk first is Judge May, and Judge May is clerk for the Honorable Peter T. Fay, 11th Court Circuit of Appeals, and in the early 80s she practiced law, and she served as circuit court judge on the 17th Judicial Circuit in the early 90s. She was appointed to the 4th District Court of Appeal by Jeb Bush, who might add fired me from the head of the health department in Duval County, but I won't hold that against you. And she is currently the president of the Council of Chief Judges of the State Court of Appeals and serves as the Florida Supreme Court's Steering Committee on Substance Abuse and Mental Health. And so that's Judge May. Coming up second is going to be Tara Wiles, and I've known Tara for 25 years, and Tara now is president of the National Alliance of Mental Health Illness, NAMI, in Jacksonville, and she serves on a number of boards, including the Disability Rights of Florida and STOP TB USA. Presently, she's which represents the rights of incarcerated populations. I knew Tara as in her role in the sheriff's office in the jail, which she ran for many years. And starting back 25 years ago when I first met Tara, her focus has been on mental health and amongst incarcerated people. So she comes with not only knowledge but tremendous amounts of experience. Our third participant is going to be Bob Dillinger. He is assistant public defender in the 6th Judicial Court of... He got the job. What's that? What did I say? No, you didn't let me finish. I'm talking about 1976 to 1981. Yeah, right. So anyway, so you know Bob, so I'm just going to go over this quickly. He's had some experience in as a law professor at Stetson. He's a native Floridian, and it's important to note here that he graduated from Columbia. So there you go. And last but not least is Don Horne, who was born in Miami, grew up in the Overtown community. He serves as the first African-American major crimes prosecutor in the state attorney's office. In '83, became the first recipient of the Florida Prosecuting Attorneys Association Gene Berry Memorial Award. And he's had lots of experience in investigation, preparation, and prosecution of capital sexual battery cases and so on. Less important who these folks are, you probably know them. Far more important what they have to say. So I'm going to stop here and allow Judge May to begin the presentations, setting a overview and sort of presenting what the ecology of the issues actually are. Judge May.
Thank you, Dr. Goldhagen. Thank you for the nice introduction. So I know a lot of you in here, so I feel like I'm among friends, and it gives me great pleasure to be able to be outside of my courthouse and not reading thousands of pages of documents in preparation for oral argument. But you might ask, what is a 4th District Court of Appeal judge doing at a conference on criminal justice, and especially serving on a mental health panel? I ask myself that sometimes. But in 1995, I had the good fortune to be asked to go into the Drug Court Division in Broward County in Fort Lauderdale. And I heard Judge you ask about getting judges to come in there, and I did not want to go, to be quite honest. I was told by my bailiff that we were going, and that's how you know things are happening in the courthouse, because the bailiff tells you way before anyone actually really does tell you. So I had spent 4 years in delinquency, was asked to take over the felony drug court. I did not believe in it. The drug court judge before me served donuts like AA meetings, and my bailiff said, if you serve donuts, I will not go with you. And I went there and decided to keep my own statistics to see if it really did work. And lo and behold, I was a convert. And so all these years later, even though my job does not entail much of this, even though the people that come before me on criminal appeals have had some of these issues, I'm still at it. So I hearken back to those days when in drug court we used to say no one with mental health issues could participate. And then as soon as we started addressing the substance abuse issues, lo and behold, all the mental health issues started coming forward to us. So lessons learned from my experience are that number one, there are a lot of people that get into the criminal justice system not because they go out and intend to be criminals and commit crimes, but have other issues that cause them to do things that get them in trouble with the criminal justice system. I was talking to the state attorney, I believe from the 5th Circuit a few minutes ago, about what is the real problem. And the real problem is that our community mental health and substance abuse system is not funded, and therefore many of these people do not get the treatment that they need, and they end up in the criminal justice system or the juvenile justice system, and then they become court issues. And so I wholeheartedly subscribe to the point that if we could have fixed it on the front end, we wouldn't all necessarily be here dealing with some of these issues, although some of them I'm sure would have slipped through anyhow. And so I find the court system to really be a repository of a lack of resources in our community. And the reality of it is that's not getting any better in the years I've been involved, as many people as there are that advocate for more resources for mental health and substance abuse. We don't seem to make much traction. Example, last year, Department of Corrections cut a very significant amount of substance abuse treatment dollars because they had to fund health. And so we have a real conundrum to deal with. And then I also find that you have unintended consequences for things that we do. For example, drug courts mostly started with first-time offenders, thinking, well, the person that has a first charge for a drug possession charge should come into a drug court. And lo and behold, all these years later, we are finding through the science that it's the high-risk, high-need offenders that really need all the bells and whistles of a problem-solving court, and that many of the people that we started with would have done much better with diversion, and we spend a lot of money on resources that we may not have needed to use. And I was happy to hear the last panel talk about having different tracks for different offenders that come through the system. I was very active with the prescription drug monitoring database legislation. We thought we were doing a really good thing to close all the pill mills, many of which were located in my home county of Broward. And then now we find that the heroin epidemic is just gotten crazed. And then we have fentanyl and other issues, and we have a very high overdose death rate that we didn't have before. So we all try to fix things, and sometimes when we fix them, we create an issue we never really thought about before. So problem-solving courts do work. You've heard the last panel of some of you that were here talk about the various types of problem-solving courts. And I work, I think, because they're collaborative, and I think us all being here today, and as I look at my colleagues here on this panel, we're kind of a team too. We have a public defender, a prosecutor, someone involved in treatment and corrections, and a judge, and that is part of the nucleus of any problem-solving court team. So hopefully together we can come up with some solutions, as the doctor mentioned earlier. I want you to just pretend like you're closing your eyes for a minute, and I want you to picture about a 5'8" male county court judge in Dade County by the name of Leifman, who's supposed to be here talking to you about mental health, because as we both serve on the steering committee, my real expertise has been in substance abuse, and I like to say that together we are co-occurring. So I immediately, when I saw I was on the mental health panel, I said, okay, a mental health guru, give me some information. So I have some statistics to lay out for you to kind of set the groundwork and the floor for what we're all going to be talking about. Many of you probably know these, and he was gracious enough to give them to me. So Florida ranks 44th nationally in access to mental health care, only to be 49th among all the states in spending per capita for people that need mental health care. Of 2.6 million adults in Florida who experience mental health problems, only about 38.3% actually receive treatment. And in Florida, the police initiate more involuntary examinations under the Baker Act than the total number of arrests for robbery, burglary, and grand theft combined. Roughly 120,000 people with serious mental illness are arrested and booked into our Florida jails annually. There are currently 17,000 people in the prison system with mental health issues, approximately 9,000 in our jails, and between 22 and 37,000 on some form of community supervision. The total cost to us in Florida is $865 million a year, or $2.3 million a day. We indeed have a problem. Between 1996 and 2016, the overall inmate population in Florida prisons increased by 54%, while the number of inmates that needed mental health services increased by 157%. I don't think that's hard to understand. I know Tara has been involved in reentry. That is also a subject near and dear to my heart. I have for almost the past 20 years been advocating for a reentry bill to help people step down out of the corrections system in the same manner we use problem-solving courts so that we have better outcomes and reduce recidivism. So keep tuned. We're still working on it again this year.
Did you get vetoed?
Yeah, it finally got passed in 2012, only to be vetoed by the governor. So it was kind of like, yay, no. We also have a very big problem with a lot of money being spent on incompetency or restoration of competency, and that takes away a lot of the funding for general mental health. A couple years ago, that was they reduced the amount of time that you could in order to determine that whether someone was ever going to become competent again, and I think there's still work to be done there. And so I would say that what we really need to do today are to look for some solutions. One of them was talked about by Mr. Horne about coming up with best standards, which we have done through the steering committee previously the Task Force on Substance Abuse and Mental Health, which will ultimately lead to certification. And with that, I will stop and let someone else talk for a few minutes.
Great. Thank you. Tara's going to be next to continue with the understanding of what the issues are and talk a little bit about reentry.
I'm going to talk a little bit about being in jail, since I was there for 31 and a half years. And the food, not very good. Coffee is worse. Mattresses don't sleep well. And the other thing is, what we're doing doesn't work. It doesn't mean that we need to throw out the whole system of corrections, but what we do need to do is rethink about what we're doing with people while we have them and make sure that we have the right people. Because one thing I can tell you about jail as well is it is not a therapeutic environment. It is not built to be a therapeutic environment. It is not meant to be a therapeutic environment. And we don't do a very good job, like I say. And it's not just the people who work in corrections. It's not just the people that work in law enforcement. It's the entire criminal justice system, when over 30% of the people that we send to jails are rearrested within a year after they come out. Over 60% of the people that we convict and send to prison within 5 years are back in the prison system with another conviction. That's not a very good track record that we have. So that's just overall averages, and those likelihoods of recidivism are even higher for someone that's living with mental illness, specifically untreated mental illness. So what I want to talk about a little bit today is how the criminal justice system can make a difference in that. We're not a social service system. There are social service systems that are out there that we need to coordinate and work with, but it kind of has become the job of the criminal justice system by default, because the other systems aren't either funded, working, or set up to do what needs to be done to keep people with mental illness out of the criminal justice system. We've got to start thinking about things more on a continuum basis and the importance of early intervention. One of the things that we know is that first episode psychosis, when somebody has that first psychotic break, if you can intervene at that time and get individuals the treatment they need, then they are going to be far less likely to have a lifelong severe and chronic mental illness. And since Judge May mentioned about the costs, let me tell you what the costs are for somebody who is living with a severe and chronic mental illness. Over the course of their lifetime, you're talking about over $1.2 million of taxpayer-funded money when you include all of the options of going to emergency rooms, the average of the Baker Acts, the incarcerations. That's what it's costing our system to deal with individuals in these circumstances. So we need training like CIT, crisis intervention, and mental health first aid for our police officers so that they know that there are alternatives to arrest. I mean, I was a law enforcement person, and that's what they teach you to do in the academy, is they teach you to arrest. You know, that's the easiest way to deal with everything. And one of the things that crisis intervention trains you is there are alternatives to that arrest. So that's one of your first steps in diversion. But you know what? Some people need arresting, and some people need incarceration. For those individuals, then we look at diversion depending on what they've done. And there's a continuum of diversion as well. Not everyone is suitable to go to a mental health court. Some individuals may be diverted with an ex parte order into the social service system at first appearance. Other individuals, may have to stay incarcerated, and in that case, we've got to have effective and appropriate mental health treatment for individuals while they're incarcerated so that we're not putting them back out worse than they were when we got them. That's one of the very disappointing things that's happened with the State Department of Corrections this year with their cut in the funding, is along with that cut in the substance abuse funding, there was also a significant cut in the mental health funding and also to reentry services. Now, we're very blessed in Duval County to have a good reentry program, but if we can't get mental health records and treatment, what's happened with individuals while they've been with the state, then it's difficult for us to connect them with the meager services that we have when they get out. But talking back about early intervention, that I believe is the key, and it starts before arrest. It starts before the law enforcement training. That early intervention actually starts in education, in early education. To reduce stigma, people need to be able to talk about mental illness. They need to be able to have the treatment that they need immediately accessible and universally available. You don't have a mental health crisis typically around 11 o'clock Monday through Friday. You have a mental health crisis at 2 in the morning on a Saturday night or sometime like that, and that's not when those services are available. We now have, most places have little emergency rooms, have these little emergency facilities on almost every corner to relieve the hospitals, the burdens that they have in the emergency room. We need those same emergency rooms for people with mental health and substance abuse issues. People need to be able to access care when they need the care, and that care needs to be immediately available to them. And one of the ways that the people in this room can help make those kind of things happen is by partnering with nonprofits like the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the Mental Health Association, the Housing First coalitions, the criminal justice system working together with nonprofits and community-based organizations. We exponentially grow our ability to make a difference by doing that. There is no one part of this system that can do it alone. We all have to work together, and we have to bring the people in who have the expertise to be able to get these things done with them. But that can sometimes be more difficult than it seems, and working with a lot of nonprofits agencies who may seem to be more in competition than collaboration can be difficult, and that's what you guys can bring to it, though, is that you can bring that mediation and that ability to get the right people in the room and get them talking so that the resources that are available are used in the best way that they can be. Incarceration should be 3 things. Incarceration should be rare, it should be fair, and it should be beneficial. If it's not those 3 things, then we're not getting what we're paying an awful lot of money for right now.
Great. Well, thank you, Tara. Next, we have Bob Dillinger, who's going to talk about diversion programs and Baker Acts.
Thank you. When the Affordable Care Act was created, the goal was to treat health as health, and that included mental health and substance abuse, because when a physician looks at the holistic person, the mental health and substance abuse is part of that person. Unfortunately, the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, didn't go well in the state of Florida. Anything with the name Obama on it did not seem to go well in the state of Florida. So we are an outlier state where we treat mental health and substance abuse separate and apart from health. So when I started this long ago, we were treating mental health and substance abuse by silos. In other words, there was a silo for funding for mental health and a silo for funding of substance abuse. And what we saw, or what I would see as an assistant, I was an assistant at the time, is you'd send a client over because they had both mental health and substance abuse, and you'd send them for substance abuse. Substance abuse would say, well, we can't do anything till you address the mental health. And then the mental health would say, no, we can't do anything until you take care of the substance abuse. And by then the person's reoffended or taken off. And they usually end up in prison. We at least now address co-occurring, meaning they have both, and you can never tell, or not, often don't know which came first. So when I took office, I was really upset with the fact that our mental health services in Florida, and if you look at the little squib that's in the brochure of this program, it's very accurate. We are 49th in the nation in per capita funding for mental health. We're below Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, the Deep South folks. The only state lower than us, supposedly, is Idaho. But I don't know if you've ever been to Idaho, half the state is controlled by the federal government. A good portion is controlled by these groups that have camps that don't really seem to like people coming up to their gate and asking about the mental health aspects of the people behind the gates. So I'm not so sure the Idaho part is that accurate. But when I took office and it was clear, I mean, we would have clients that would have to wait 6-8 months for a 1-hour evaluation at a community-based healthcare provider. And that's just not going to hack it. Particularly, when you ask a judge, he's got some mental health issues, we think. In 6 months, he can get to the provider. Will you let him out ROR for those 6 months? And you can imagine what the answer was. So we were able to get funding. And back in the day, like in 2002 and 2003, there were earmarks. The federal government had earmarks. So we got an earmark to start in Pinellas County. And we started a jail diversion program. It was in conjunction with the community-based care people. And it started out strictly for removing mentally ill people from the jail. And I say this because, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. There's a lot of smart folks. You can do these things in your community. And you have to prove that it will work. And what we've done and what has grown is I've kind of gotten away from the community-based providers because they thought they should always have the money that I have. So our jail diversion program, just to give you some stats and then to show you how it works, since 2004 through the end of 2017, we had diverted from the jail 6,395 individuals. Those are non-duplicated individuals. Before jail diversion, those individuals had 51,341 arrests. After jail diversion, they had 3,299 arrests, which is a 94% reduction in arrests. So our purpose was to keep these mentally ill individuals out of the jail and not being arrested. Now, the basis for it was what used to be an Axis 1 diagnosis was the criteria, and they had to agree to do it. It was a voluntary program. And as the program grew, so did our resources. And it's like you would be surprised at the cottage industries that kind of spring up. So I can go before a judge now and say, Judge, we can put this person in this place that has 24/7 supervision for $800 a month out of my budget, which is the county-funded part of the budget. Or you can keep them in the jail, and the Pinellas County jail is $100 and something a day, and the Pasco jail is about $90 a day. And we can have treatment, and we can hopefully have this person successfully complete probation. The weakness of our program in the 6th is we don't get charges dismissed. We end up with successful completions of probation for the most part. So it's very frustrating to see these mental health issues going on in the community. I can do everything in terms of felonies or misdemeanors. I can do arsonists. I can do sex offenders because I have no strings from the federal government or the state government because of the source of the funding. The frustration, and Kathy Smith touched upon it a little bit, are the ITP, the incompetent to proceed folks. I had our folks pull, just in Pinellas County, for the last 2 years, the number of people in circuit and county court found incompetent to proceed, and it was 770 people in 2 years that had been found incompetent to proceed. Some of those had been restored. But when you're dealing with misdemeanors, there's nothing out there. Our county has agreed to fund the treatment for ITP misdemeanors, and we get about a 50% agreement for those folks to come in to treatment. And what do we provide in treatment? It's really designed to do a 90-day treatment. We have our own master's level therapist, we have our own transportation, we have our own apartment building, and we have about 29 different providers that provide 24/7 supervision and different types of treatment. And some people don't fit into some types of treatment. They'll fit better in others. We distinguish between the male and the female population. We do not mix those two populations at any facility. So the positive aspect of what I said is that 94% reduction in arrests of people, and those are we track that since '04 up through 17. The discouraging part of that to me is that if there were sufficient community-based providers and community-based treatment, a lot of those people would have never been in the criminal justice system. It's bad enough to be labeled a criminal, but it's even worse to have the stigma of mentally ill plus being labeled a criminal, which makes life very difficult for people who oftentimes can't handle a lot of difficult situations. So when we go to the legislature and talk about this, we don't seem to get a very good reception. In 1 year alone, $100 million was cut out of mental health. I'm involved in a program that's Recovery Through Work for the Mentally Ill that opened the doors in 2003, and it gets less state funding now in 2018 than it got in 2003. So we just don't seem to be addressing the issues that need to be addressed. The earlier that we can address these issues, the better off our results are going to be. We do not. I hadn't really heard till today about juvenile mental health court, because we generally consider 18 to 24 when schizophrenia sets in, the college kids that get schizophrenia. But there are children who are being addressed as mentally ill as early as 2. And you're going like, yeah, this guy's off his rocker. But the Baker Act statistics that we get, and I'm going to try to go over a little bit towards the Baker Act, that used to have a 0 to 5 age category. Well, they had to break that down between 0 to 3 and 3 to 5 because they were Baker Acting 2 and 3 and 4-year-old children. And, you know, the general bar really doesn't know anything about Baker Acts. When we were in front of the Supreme Court about the Doe case that came out about the judges having to actually be at the hearing, those Supreme Court justices didn't seem to know too much about Baker Act, but we taught them, and they did the right thing. But these children are being Baker Acted, and you wonder why. So anybody in this room that has children under the age of 18 should be concerned. And you should be concerned because in the last 5 years, Baker Acts of children have doubled. Now, there is a coincidence, as the DCF people like to call it, that there was incredible pressure on the school boards to reduce arrests in the school system. So they did that. So arrests in the school systems went down like this. Well, Baker Acts out of the school system went like this. So that kid was leaving that school one way or the other, whether they labeled it an arrest or they labeled it a Baker Act. The collateral consequences to a child for being Baker Acted are significant. Not only, we're in the age of bullying and taunting. What do you think happens when the school resource officer comes in, handcuffs a kid, and says, you're mentally ill, we're taking you to the Baker Act? When that kid comes back to school, what do you think is going to happen? It's probably not pleasant. Some of them have been trespassed from the school, and we have further issues. You cannot get into the military if you've ever been Baker Acted. Okay? There are certain jobs that you cannot have if you've ever been Baker Acted that are government jobs. So we keep trying to stress this fact that these children should not be labeled as mentally ill in a Baker Act facility because they should be diverted. You don't want to be labeling these children as mentally ill. And when I see 2 and 3-year-olds, I'm kind of curious how the input person or the intake person talk to them. Like, how do you talk to a 2-year-old about mental health issues?
How are you feeling today?
Like, you have delusions? Well, give me a break. So those are significant issues, and parents that we see where the children are Baker acted have no clue about Baker acts. I mean, most people don't. I mean, the PD does basically 100% of them. And then they get upset, and I don't blame them, because, you know, the kid just had a bad day. And lo and behold, the school system and the SRO don't know what to do, so they Baker act them. You know, if they don't Baker act them and the child does something, the school system's in trouble. And now I'm yelling at the school system for doing something. So they're kind of caught. But, you know, no matter which way they go, one of us is going to complain. But we need to make sure that we do this in the right fashion, and we need to divert these children. I'm not a big fan of telemedicine for mental health, but they want to do some more telemed for quick analysis and examinations in schools, because we got a ton of schools when you think about it. So that leads me to the final thing I want to talk about, which are the proposals from several different committees. I'm on one of them, Kathy Smith's on the other one, and they want to do Baker Acts by video, that all witnesses can appear by video for Baker Acts. Now, you know, I've been doing this for 40 some odd years. I've had many a client that says the TV talks to them, and it's not the TV show that's talking to them, it's a voice. The TV could be turned off, and it's still talking to them. So to have this TV screen in a hearing room talking to these clients that are very paranoid is not a productive way, and it's really being done for the convenience of certain groups of people. It's not in any way a due process issue for the person who is being Baker acted, who's being deprived of their liberty and not being given due process. When, you know, these are the most vulnerable people in our population, and we're treating them like, oh, okay, you can do it all by video because it's more convenient for certain groups. So hopefully we can defeat that. But if it comes up and you're at the Board of Governors or you're up at the legislature, I hope that you will agree with us that those folks need to have face-to-face confrontation with their witnesses, just like you would do in a regular courtroom proceeding, before their liberty is taken away from them. So with that, I'm done.
Well, certainly the issues related to Baker Act and children are critically important and ones that we're dealing with straightforwardly, actually, in Jacksonville. We can perhaps talk about that as well. Just a quick comment: as few resources that are available to adults with mental health issues, cut that in half, or cut it in a quarter, or cut it in an eighth as to what's available for children. And so, if we're going to stop this before it starts, then the issues related to access to mental health services for children critically important. I'm going to then introduce Don again, who's going to sort of pull this all together, and then we'll have opportunities for discussion. And we've already started talking about solutions, but then we'll continue on with that as well. Don.
All right, some opening comments. My boss is Catherine Fernandez-Rondo, the state attorney in the 11th Judicial Circuit. As we heard from some of the panelists and folks in the audience at the last session, a number of you have come down to our circuit to meet Judge Leifman and also get information on how our jail diversion program is working, and it has been very, very successful, and it helps that Judge Leifman was very successful in getting a $1 million grant to assist in the expansion of that program some time ago. But what I want to do from our comments is kind of frame them as follows. When Ms. Rundle brought me back to the office as her chief assistant 16 and a half years ago, 3 areas of responsibilities that I got included, in no particular order, being general counsel for the Miami-Dade County Grand Jury, becoming the co-chair of our officer-involved shooting review committee, and being the chief assistant who had oversight over the attorneys who handle mental health issues and over our mental health court. And over the course of my comments, initial comments, I'm going to show how all three of these actually relate to mental illness. In my role as general counsel for the Dade County Grand Jury, the grand jury in the 11th Circuit does probably something differently than most of the other 19 circuits, because in addition to presenting evidence to get true bills, indictments for folks charged with first-degree murder, we request that our grand juries consider doing investigations on topics that they find are major issues for our county. They bring in witnesses, they conduct an investigation, and they issue a grand jury report with a number of recommendations for fixes that can be made to whatever the problem, issue, topic that they've selected. After I got there in 2002, within a 5-year period beginning in 2004, the Dade County Grand Jury issued 4 grand jury reports, all having something to do with mental illness. In 2004, we issued a report entitled 2004 Spring Term Mental Illness and the Criminal Justice System, a recipe for disaster, a prescription for improvement. 2005 Spring Term, tasers, deadly force with a question mark. 2007 Fall Term, shifting the focus on treating mental illness, a common sense approach, CENTS, common sense approach. And in 2009, Spring Term issue report, mental health issues revisited. What we do in the grand jury is sometimes we may make recommendations to them for topics, or there may be something going on in the community that says, hey, we think this is a problem, and this is something we need to look at. One of the things that was going on in our community back then was we had a number of people being shot and killed by police officers. A lot of the people who were being shot and killed by police officers were people who were in crisis, suffering from mental illness. And so the grand jurors decided they were going to look into this issue of mental illness, and we started bringing in people like correctional officers, police officers, Judge Leifman, who I think is the most prolific witness I've had in the grand jury the entire 16 and a half. He's been down there 5 or 6 times to testify to different grand juries about issues relating to mental illness. Every grand jury report that we release automatically goes to every member of our Board of County Commission, all 13 of them, the mayor, the chief judge of the Florida Supreme Court, the president of the Senate, and the Speaker of the House. It doesn't matter what the topic is. And then it goes to every witness who was called in to testify during that grand jury investigation. The initial report that I told you about in 2004, the Spring Term Mental Illness and the Criminal Justice System, we went through and described in great detail some of the same issues that you heard from Judge May, Mr. Dillinger, regarding statistics, regarding the numbers of folks who are suffering, regarding the number of people who are in the jails and the corrections from Tara, and actually tried to quantify that just as Mr. Dillinger and Melanie were doing earlier. When the jail diversion, misdemeanor jail diversion program started back in the early 2000s, we cited in our report that looking for the numbers in 2002, the diversion program, jail diversion program, diverted 221 folks. The next year, they diverted 283 folks in 2003. The information we got that the recidivism rate for this population of folks who were being diverted, the recidivism rate was 70% before the jail diversion program. The year after they started the program, it dropped from 70% down to 18%. The year after that, it dropped 2 more percentage points to 16%. And then what we tried to do was quantify what that meant in dollars, and the conservative estimate that we got was for that 1-year period, Miami-Dade County saved $2.5 million. We included in that report information from some other counties and other states, including in Seattle, Washington. They spent over $1.1 million on drug and acute services, alcohol acute services, and criminal justice resources, $1.1 million for 20 individuals in 1 year. Similarly, Akron, Ohio, during the year 2001, the cost of taxpayers for a group of 20 individuals, $1.3 million. So we issued this report saying to the Dade County Commission and everybody else, there's a better way to do this, and here are some of the things you can do. In the corrections department, we had a floor where they housed the folks who had the most severe cases of mental illness. It was a horrible place. The media got a hold of it. They came in, did exclusive interviews going through with the cameras. We took the grand jury on a tour, and it is described in detail in the report. There were a number of other floors in the jail that also had mentally ill folks, because there's just so many of them in the system. We found out from testimony from the correctional officers is correctional officers were being punished if they misbehaved. They would send them to work on those floors. So you take the worst correctional officers and put them with the folks who got the most severe problems. So some of the recommendations that we made was, one, stop doing that. Stop punishing people by sending them to the floor. Two, to the extent that we've got a crisis intervention training that's going on for the regular police out on the street, you know you've got correctional officers who's going to be dealing with this population every day. Get them crisis intervention training. They did it. For the folks who are going to be working on this floor who didn't go to medical school and don't know about the identification of folks who suffer from mental illness, give them a stipend so that there will be a benefit for folks who are going to take such duty. We had a number of recommendations. The mayor was so impacted by this report and recommendations, he created a mayor's task force. Judge Stephen Leifman was the co-chair of that task force, which had about 60 different persons representing 60 different entities and partners there in Miami-Dade County. And we have implemented every recommendation from that report except one, because we're trying to get the finalized building, the former the facility, forensic facility, retooled so that it will be able to be a one-stop shop. We'll have Baker Act hearings there. Folks will be housed there. They'll get social services there. And all of these things were enhanced by the fact that the county says, hey, we can save money, and this is working. And so as time went by, we also pointed out in some of the grand jury reports, we've seen now a reduction in the number of people suffering from mental illness being shot and killed by the police. In one of our reports, we actually added an addendum that described some of the specific incidents that had occurred in Miami-Dade County that resulted in deaths that had officers had tasers, they wouldn't have had to use the deadly force. So we got Miami-Dade Police Department, who had been reluctant at some point to issue tasers to his officers. We called the director in, and the grand jury questioned him under oath, and we issued a report, and lo and behold, shortly thereafter, they had tasers. Dade County didn't have crisis, and the Miami-Dade County Police Department had not agreed to crisis intervention training. They were the largest police department we had there. I think we have 36 different police departments in Miami-Dade County. We called the director down. We issued our report, and they've got crisis intervention training. And so it's like a bully pulpit that we use through the grand jury, but it works very, very well and gets things done. So this was the misdemeanor level. As things progressed, we then got to the point where, okay, we've got folks who are getting arrested for felony offenses. Some of them are trashy felony offenses. What I mean by that, acting in crisis. Tara is the police officer who responds to the scene, and while she's trying to arrest me, of course, I flail my arm, and now I've got a battery on a police officer, a third-degree felony. And that's coming into the system. And so the decision was made that we're now going to try to move from just focusing on folks who've got mental issues with pre-arrest diversion, post-arrest diversion, on misdemeanor cases. We're going to do something on the felony level. Okay. There's a fear factor involved here because all of the cases that are coming in with folks who've got mental illness are not the simple flailing battery on police officer. We've got folks stabbing each other. We've got folks engaged in other kind of violent behavior. So the state attorney was very, very reluctant initially. In fact, Judge Safey, our chief administrative judge on the circuit side, is the judge who oversees our mental health court. She was involved initially as we were trying to come up with the criteria with which we would allow people into the felony mental health diversion program. The criteria we came up with initially was too narrow, and they weren't getting enough people in. And then we had to get to the point where we were going to swallow really, really hard and cross our fingers and our toes and expand the criteria, because the state attorney recognizes all it takes is one person who we decide to divert, who was actually eligible to go to prison, divert them, have them on the outside in some kind of facility, and something happens, and there we are up the creek without a paddle. But we took the leap. And as I was saying to the judge, I said, "Are you staying for this second panel? Because she's here." So I'm gonna temper my comments. No. But no, we've worked together for years. And as I was saying to someone else, we have time. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and we'll come back to some other issues later. Thank you, Doctor.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm just mesmerized by the panelists. And so what we'd like to do is open this up for dialogue and discussion, questions. You can keep the questions and the comments short. But what strikes me is that there are solutions to the problems. And so the question I would ask is, what do we need to do to bring those solutions actually into force? You know, Einstein said if you continue to do the same thing over and over again, it's ridiculous to think you're going to get different results. What do we do at this point in time within the state of Florida to generalize, disseminate, and to implement the solutions that seem to be out there? Yes, sir.
Informed jurisdictions, the latest and best example, Baltimore, treat crime itself as a public health problem, from prenatal care all the way through. How do we sell that in Florida to have that concept that if we invest heavily now, starting at birth, we're going to have such a decline in the criminal justice system because we have a healthy community and we deal with problems very early.
Great. And I would add to that over the last decade, but in particular over the last 5 years, we've learned a lot about early brain development. We've learned a lot about trauma. We've learned a lot about how to address trauma. So the science now has really caught up with the epidemiology. Other comments? Yes, ma'am.
What services could we offer to parents so they wouldn't be so desperate that they'd want to Baker Act their own child?
I can answer a little bit of that. There are, and that's where I think some of the nonprofit advocacy groups that provide education to parents comes in. NAMI in particular has something that they offer in just about all of the major communities in Florida, something called the Family to Family education class, and it teaches families how to negotiate the system and how to understand what's happening with their loved one. They have something called NAMI Basics, which is a class that's specific for people with smaller children. But the Family to Family is offered with just about every one of them, and that is something that can provide that education so people know how to use the resources that they have that are specific to their community.
Questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
So, as a mentee of Judge Leifman, and of Don's too, one of the issues that we have, and I think it's statewide, is that we have a definition of legal competence that is very sort of static. And I do all the medication hearings for anyone who's housed at the South Florida Evaluation and Treatment Center, which is all of us in this room have defendants from the different jurisdictions that are there. And these are people who are not volunteering to take medication. It has to be forced on them essentially by, me at the end of a hearing. Many of those people, you can tell that they're not going to remain compliant outside of a jail setting or outside of the hospital setting. And that ends up ultimately becoming a revolving door back into the court system. Now, we're doing better in, I think, our jail, where the jail has the same formulary as the hospital, so at least the same medications can be continued in the jail. But that person still, we're not addressing the issue which kind of brought them into the system in the first place, which is they're not medication compliant. And now we're creating a situation where they're going to be restored, sent back, end up probably with a conviction, maybe prison, maybe not. And then, a few weeks down the line, they're going to be back in the same situation. So I've discussed this with Judge Leifman before, but I don't know, as a body, I don't know if it's something that you all agree with, or I think it's problematic that we have that definition of legal competence that doesn't take into account whether a person can remain legally competent on their own. And given that is, from my understanding, is that's what we're spending. Florida taxpayers are spending enormous dollars on competency restoration housing people. That may be something that we can try and address, and I don't know, maybe get more money or keep people, out of the jails and out of the hospital in a better way.
Well, unfortunately, we're kind of boxed into either we have a jail type scenario or we have a hospital type scenario with nothing really in between that can house the person and supervise them. And until we do that type of situation goes on, because our formulary is different than the Chattahoochee's, which is our main place. We need something where people who are mentally ill can go to be safe, to be supervised, and to get the treatment that they need. And, we've boiled it down to jails versus hospitals, and we need those services in between. And we just don't have them.
Need that continuum. Somebody mentioned in the earlier session about assisted outpatient treatment, and that's something that's an in-between option that a lot of communities don't have available.
We closed the TB hospital in Florida, I don't know how many years ago, more than 10 years ago. Because if you have TB in the state of Florida and around the country, somebody goes out to your house every day and watches you take your medication, because we understand the importance of TB. I'm not suggesting it's a one-to-one corollary, but we ended up closing the TB hospital, the last one. We had more than one in the past, because we took this out into the community and had an alternative. And the other comment would be, if you are not coming from the justice system and you have a mental health issue, treatment automatically includes therapy. And so the idea that you can put somebody on medication without also giving them therapy is a solution that will not get you the results that you want. So the comment would be, from a public health approach, which we've heard a lot about, go back and look at TB, and then also to really look at the standard of care for people with mental illness is both treatment as well as therapy.
Question. Florida's next to last in its spending. The solutions that we've been talking about are all costly. There's some state in the union that's spending the most in mental illness issues concerning them. What are the differences in conditions in those states that permit the political will to be developed to address mental health issues? And what is the medical community and the legal community doing in those states that we're not doing here in Florida?
I'm going to go back to the comment this gentleman made initially about Baltimore treating crime as a health issue. That ain't happening in Florida. We've got a legislature who has, over the years, developed a whole host of acronyms for identifying career criminals. And one of the consequences for designating someone as such means they're going to go to prison for a long period of time. And that get tough on crime is kind of an antipathy to the issue of trying to recognize that people have got medical issues. This is an illness. They're not committing crimes because they want to be criminals. They're committing crimes because they're sick. And if the legislature would recognize that, they'd be able to save all those millions and millions of dollars that they're spending on the back end by just making sure that we've got the support and wraparound services available so that even if the person is in that jail diversion program, they get released. We've got enough services out there, and the kinds of things we are doing in Dade County. Miami-Dade County Homeless Trust was one of the entities part of the mayor's task force. They assist significantly because a lot of this population, they're homeless, but we make sure they can get some place to stay that's stable. They've got folks who are assisting them in getting identification cards. They've got folks who are assisting them in getting their benefits restored because when they got arrested, the benefits stopped. They got a revolving fund that says until you get your benefits restored, we're going to take care of your medication and take care of paying this. And then when you get your benefits restored, you'll refund us back so that we've still got this money here. And that kind of stuff works. And if the legislature would see that this could save them money, then maybe they would do something like that and actually put the money there, and they'd end up saving money in the long run. And folks would end up getting help, and they wouldn't end up coming back recycling in our system.
But that begs the question, because the legislature has heard this over and over and over and over and over again, and both at the local level, the county level, the state level. And so where has the translation gone wrong? It's not as if people, very influential people, haven't brought this to their attention. And with the defunding of the $100 million this past year, I don't know that there's a better indication of how deaf the legislature is. So what are solutions? What are the solutions? How do we make that? How do we make this work?
Well, if I had the answers, I'd be doing something else. But I think what you said about saving money, it seems to me the legislature is driven by a couple of things. One is crisis, and the other is budget. Because when the economy tanked, all of a sudden, despite of all our enhancement sentencing statutes, all of a sudden now, if you only scored so many points, you as a judge had to explain why you were sending somebody to the prison, because you were supposed to keep them out of the prison because that's what could be afforded. It's been my experience with drug courts, we had to prove our value, and now we are being funded. And I think the same is true with mental health and the diversion programs that both the 6th and the 11th Circuit seem to be working on. Talking to them about what mental health is, and they may hear it, they may not, but ultimately it's how they split up the money and where they're going to get the biggest bang for their buck. And we've got to prove to them that doing something different is more cost effective than what we're continuing to do, it seems to me.
And one of the ways I think that we fail in being able to do that is we do not have adequate data integration between all of these systems. Everybody's keeping their own data in their own way, and I can point to this program works and that program works, which is all good, but we need a statewide integrated data system that can be used to show the legislature what is working and how it's working and who's doing it best.
I just want to respond to that. I sat on the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Corporation, which was established way back when they did the managing entities. And that was our number one recommendation to the legislature, is to get a coordinated database. And it was my opinion, after we talked about it long enough, is that it's intentionally done that way. Because that way they don't have to face
I agree.
the reality.
Yes, sir. If you could hold off for a second, we have Vanna White here.
The data is important, and it's important particularly with regard to accountability. In my county, our circuit, we struggle with that. We work with USF, but as of the last few years, the Offstate Court Administration has come out with the drug court case management system, and we're using that for all of our problem-solving courts now, and it's tracking probably 50 different data points, and it is in a standardized fashion. There's controls on who can access it, who can't, and all the rest of it, but it is providing that kind of platform that I sensed you were saying doesn't exist. It is in the works and is actually operational now.
Yes, sir.
I think we also need to work on getting law enforcement behind us. And that primarily is the sheriffs. I'm very lucky that I have a sheriff that very much understands mental health. You heard about a sheriff in Collier County. Because if I go to the legislature and say we need mental health funding, they go, yeah. If the sheriffs go to the legislature and say we need mental health funding, they tend to listen more. My sheriff has a mental health unit now. He now just was funded by the county for intensive case management of people they chronically were Baker acting. And they're doing that as part of the sheriff. So if we can get them on crisis intervention training, they got a bunch of money for that to do that statewide. If we get law enforcement behind us, because they're the ones that deal with it on the street, they're the ones that have to deal with it in their jails, we at least can make, hopefully, a dent and get these folks to listen to us. But you're right. I mean, we've been preaching this for a long time. This isn't new. I mean, from when did Partners in Crisis? I mean,
Yeah.
that was our belief with law enforcement there to help. It's just very frustrating. But, you know, hopefully we can make some inroads if we get the right legislators and we get the right law enforcement folks behind us. But beyond that, I mean,
I think it's the key. You have to have a unified strategy between law enforcement, between prosecutors, between public defenders, between court administrators, nonprofits, community-based organizations, mental health and substance abuse treatment providers. All of those players need to have a unified front in approaching the legislature with what works and what doesn't.
well, and one of the problems that I have seen and dealt with is the mental health providers. This is not an original statement for me, but I believe it now. Mental health providers tend to circle the wagons and then shoot
they do.
inward.
Yes, they do.
And that's a problem. You know, that
I'm gonna have to think about that for a while. What does that actually mean?
They fight among themselves over every penny, and instead of having unified fronts, they fight among each other.
Competition over collaboration.
So here they've circled their wagons, and they're just picking and taking pot shots at each other, instead of having a unified front with law enforcement, the prosecutors, the PDs, and that's a bit of a problem.
So let me ask the question to folks and throughout the room. How do we bring that group together? We have multiple different elements of the justice system in the room here. I personally represent the entire medical and mental health. So how do we bring these entities? Together? And although I understand what you're saying and agree, but if you take a group of starving people and throw some breadcrumbs into the middle of them,
Feeding friends.
they're not going to line up and wait for their turn. So there are a lot of issues here. But so how do we bring you all together? How is that done? Who takes that responsibility?
The medical profession.
And get Healthy Florida tax on prepared food, alcoholic beverages, the Bloomberg sugar, the whole thing is a Get Healthy Florida tax incentive for everybody benefits. A Get Healthy Florida lottery. Pennsylvania has a lottery solely for the benefit of seniors. You think every senior turned out to vote for that in Pennsylvania, where they get a visiting nurse and housekeeping services, all that?
All right, so we're almost out of time, but I think that's this last question is the critical question, and that is, how do we bring everybody together? There's a famous journalist, I can never remember his name, so famous, but he is a famous journalist, who said for every complex problem there's a simple solution, and it's wrong. And so there are no simple.
H.L. Mencken.
That's exactly H.L. Mencken. That's exactly right. So how do we do this? How do we leave the room in 3 minutes? So
I don't have 3 minutes, but
No.
I think most of us have public safety coordinating councils, and we go to the meetings and they talk about jail statistics and things like that. I think we could use that to change the focus, not to how many people are there, but why are they there, and what we could do more productively to get them out of there.
You have all the players on those councils, and in many counties, they're just a meeting that you go to monthly, quarterly, whatever, and nothing, you just talk about statistics and nothing ever gets done, but you have all the players there. It's set up to be a steering committee for change.
So with a coalition of councils, is that?
I think that's a doable thing,
reasonable-
because every county has one, or should.
Okay. Other comments, solutions, simple solutions? People in the room willing to go back to their counties and where, from whence did you come, to move this agenda forward? I have a more conspiratorial perspective in that this is big business, right? This incarcerating people is big business, and fighting against private sector business elements is difficult. We certainly do it in the medical arena with managed care companies making huge profits off of sickness. And so it's not just in our sector, it's in every sector. I don't know where that fits into the scenario either, but are people willing to go back to their communities and begin to work together to address this issue in a statewide perspective?
Sure.
I mean, that's a question you have to, obviously, we're not going to answer that right now, but at least it's fodder for moving forward, and maybe the councils provide the solution, part of the solution. Maybe it's judges, state attorneys must have some coalition, a group of state attorneys, and maybe it's coming back to the public defender groups, the state attorney groups, the judges, and the coalition of the councils.
You make me think about when we used to have the Office of Drug Control in the governor's office, and Jim McDonough was the original director there under Governor Bush. And things got done then because you had someone who was in charge of making sure they got done. And so perhaps having some type of office like that within the governor's office, whoever the governor is next, could be the person who brings these groups together and makes something actually happen, because they have that's their job.
Right.
We all do this as a sideline to help what we do, or because we have passion or interest in it, but we need someone who's going to actually do the job.
Great. Just so before Bush fired me, Jim paid me a visit one time when we tried to get needle exchange programs in Jacksonville. That didn't go over so well. All right, so we're done, but I think we've come full circle. Let me thank the panelists who taught me an amazing amount. I've got lots of notes here. I think we left an hour and 15 minutes, at least with a charge as to how we move forward to do what we already know how to do in many respects. And there are examples, pilots around. Actually, they're not pilots anymore. They've been in place for years. So we have examples of very successful programs. What we need to do, and it sounds like, is to disseminate that knowledge and together identify how we generate the political will to do what needs to be done. If the $100 million cut in mental health services this year is not an example of what our challenge is, I don't know what it would be, but it sounds like there's at least the knowledge and experience and perhaps the will to move forward so that 10 years from now when we're here, there will be a very different discussion than it is currently. I need to thank you all for tremendous presentations.